Hello, gals. Welcome back to the Eat Like Ruby podcast and welcome to episode 101. If you listened last week, we dropped episode 100, which is so exciting. 100 episodes, weekly episodes, 2 years. It's awesome. I love it. I spoke about it last week, so I won't crap on about it now. The one thing I will say though, guys, is I've said this before, I'll say it again. Podcasting is a big chunk of my time and money and energy, and I love to know that people are actually loving it. So please, if you have not rated the Eat Like Ruby podcast on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to it, please do so. It truly means so much. Like, it actually means so much to keep getting the podcast out there and get it to more people and have more people listen. But it also means a lot to me to actually be like, yep, okay, people are picking up what I'm putting down and they're loving the pod. If you listen on Apple, absolutely do like the written review. You don't have to write your life story. I don't mind. You can keep it brief, but also let us know what episode you love. Like I said last week, I think the body composition, fat loss, mindset episodes are really where the juice is at. And I definitely want to bring some more of those. I'm going to bring another one right here, right now. But again, if you listen on Apple, drop the comment in there and let us know in your review, like what episode you love, because obviously if we know what you guys are loving, we can keep pumping them out right through 2025. But I'm going to smash out another ep right now. This is going to flow on from last week. So if you listened to last week, I said I was going to break down all the different categories of like people with a big weight loss goal, small weight loss goal, no weight loss goal, muscle gain goal, etc., and give my advice and plans and protocols and everything for 2025. I think I spent about 45 minutes on the big weight loss goal and then we wrapped up the episode there. But I actually really wanted to start with that category and I wanted to spend a bit more time on that category because I don't think we've ever spoken to that. We've kind of spoken about this a little bit before. I did an episode similar to this where I broke down the categories way back at the start of the year, but I don't think we've ever really done that big dedicated episode to people in a position where they feel like there is a big weight loss goal and they are quite overwhelmed and or frustrated and just feeling like, fuck, I don't know where to start, or I've got a long way to go when I do start. So if you can relate to that and you're in that position, definitely have a listen to last week's episode because I really wanted to just give some really specific advice to that niche and that category of people. And I think it went off a little bit. I think it went in a few directions, but I really think there could be some beneficial chat in there if you're in that position. So that was last week. This is this week. I'm going to keep moving forward. And the next category I'm going to speak to is people in a position where there's a bit of a weight loss goal, but it's not huge. And I usually say this is like around that 10 kilo mark, because if we think about somebody losing 10 kilos or less, like let's say give or take 10, you don't really need to spend the whole year doing this. And you kind of can. And I guess this is what I'm going to speak to now. But if we think about someone aiming to lose 30 kilos, you're looking at most of your year being dedicated towards fat loss. Usually if you're in that position of 20 plus kilos, when we start talking about things like muscle gain or weight gain or coming out of a deficit, etc., usually people are like, no, I'm not near that point because I've got to get this weight off first. So that was really last week's episode. Now, as we move into that category of people where there is a bit of a fat loss goal or a bit of a weight loss goal, but you might be like, I can get this done in a few months. This doesn't have to be my whole year. It definitely doesn't have to be multiple years. That's what I'm going to speak to now. In my opinion, and there's going to be maybe a little bit of conflicting shit I say here. I don't really have any notes on this, but this shit lives rent-free in my head 24/7. So I feel like we sort of have two options when we're in this position. And I think it comes down to your personality type and sort of what resonates most with you. Because what I mean is, I think we've got the option. If people are long-term listeners and or you follow on Insta, YouTube, all those things, you'll know that anytime I do a muscle gain phase and then pivot into fat loss, I go for around that 10 kilo weight drop. And when we think about that, that's usually around 3 to 4 months. Like I don't spend a year doing that. But this is what I kind of want to point out. I think there's one way we can do that where we go quite hard, quite aggressive. It's quite a short, sharp, direct fat loss phase. We don't fuck around. We don't do the diet breaks. We don't have the weekends out. We don't do any high or low days or anything. Like we very much get in, get the job done and get it out. I think that's one option. And I think the other option is somebody who doesn't like that approach and thinks, no, I do want a bit more flexibility and I want things to be a little bit more chilled. So I'm willing to implement that phase for a bit longer, knowing it's going to be a bit more of a gradual, slow burn. And I don't think either one of these approaches is right or wrong. Like I said, obviously in that first approach, if we know our deficit, we calculate a deficit, we get in there and we don't have too much flexibility. We don't go out for big meals on the weekend. We don't go on 2-week holidays. We don't do all these crazy things. And that's not to say we can't do these things, guys. Like, I can't stress enough, with flexible diet, we can absolutely do that. But I think when you're someone who like this style appeals to, if you know, you know. Usually like you're a gym girl and you're like, I'm just clearing my schedule for 2 or 3 months and I'm fucking getting this done, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like I said, I think the alternative, if you're in a position where there is like 8 to 10 kilos similar and you think, no, I don't want to live like a robot and go too hard, you can implement a little bit more of a moderate deficit. You can have that bit more flexibility, some high and low days, some weekends, and it can almost be that like 2 step forward, 1 step back approach. And if we think about that, 2 steps forward and 1 step back is still moving forward. So again, there's nothing wrong with that. But this is where I think we just have to be really understanding, aware and accepting of what position we're in, what resonates with us, what feels good for us. Like I said, people tend to know if they're quite an like aggressive, go hard person. And this, again, this can be quite a typical thing for the gym girls, because if you're a gym girl who loves to focus on like performance and muscle gain and all that, usually there's an element there where you're like, I don't want to spend any longer in the deficit than I need to. So I'm fucking getting in, getting the result and getting back on high calories as soon as I can, which is awesome. That's very much the approach I take. On the flip side, like I said, if that doesn't really appeal to you and you think, nope, I want to chip away a bit slower, know that I can have a bit more flexibility, meals out, be a bit more loose, but it will be sort of that approach of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's totally fine as well. So really just have a think about what appeals to you for that, and then almost tie it back to what we said last week. And if you haven't listened to last week's ep, definitely do so, because there's going to be a lot of crossover. But you really want to have a think about what December looks like for you. I think 99.9% of people should spend December at maintenance. I've said this last week. I said it in the fuck it mode call a few weeks ago. But the reason for this is we want to have an intentional phase at maintenance at some point to offset the physical shit that comes with dieting, like low energy and things like that, but also just to relieve some of like the mental and emotional pressure that comes with dieting, just feeling over being in a deficit all the time, being on a diet all the time. So we know that when we step back and look at long periods of time or the year as a whole, we want to spend some time at maintenance. In my mind, I go, okay, well, if we know we want to spend some time at maintenance, and we also know that December is a time where there is a bit more flexibility in meals out, etc., why not overlap those things? If I look at my schedule and I know that I can really sort of get after my fat loss goals through August, September, October, but then when I look at November and or December, and there's a lot of other shit happening that makes that hard, work with it, not against it. So implement the diet and the deficit during the times that really suits you to do so. And then if you look at your schedule and go, fuck, it probably wouldn't suit me right now because of lifestyle and external factors. Again, how do I work with that instead of against it? And come back to that point of, well, I know that it's beneficial to spend some time at maintenance. So again, tie it all in together, make it work. And like I said, I think most people should spend most of December at maintenance, experience or like reap the benefits of that, physically, mentally, all of that. And then as you come out the other side and you come into January, work out where you're at and where you go from there. If you've got that big weight loss goal like we spoke about last week, tee up your deficit, get after it as soon as it suits you to do so. If you're in this position of having a bit of a fat loss goal, a bit of a weight loss goal, again, have a think about, okay, cool, when would it suit me to tighten things up, go back into the deficit and get after it from there. And then for those first initial months of the year, I would be navigating this a really similar way to like what we spoke about last week. If you've had that chilled, flexible, relaxed December, and side note guys, if you haven't listened to Fuck It Mode, definitely go back and do so. Having a chilled, relaxed December doesn't mean having a shitty quality nutrition fuck it mode, December. Very big difference. So definitely go back and listen to our last 3 to 4 episodes and really tie this stuff in. It's not about having a shitty month. It's about having a bit of a different month to work with your schedule, not against it. But I'm in a side note, I'll bring it back. If we then arrive in January and then we look and go, okay, when does it suit me to tighten things up, go into the deficit, we can put that in place through Jan, Feb, March, kind of like I spoke about last week. And then we can start to look at, have I actually achieved my goal in that time? So do I move out of the deficit and go to maintenance? Am I chipping away at my goal, but I have a bit more to go? So I'll implement a bit of a diet break around April, school holidays, Easter. We spoke about this last week, and then go back into my deficit for a while. This is where I think we see the difference between a person who, if you have gone quite hard in a really effective deficit through Jan, Feb, March, you could absolutely find yourself in the position by April where you're like, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve in terms of fat loss, and now I shift my focus for winter and or the rest of the year. If you took a bit more of a moderate approach, like I said, you might feel like you're absolutely moving towards it, but you've still got a little bit of a way to go. This is where you'll have some crossover with what we spoke about last week. Do I have a diet break? Do I chill for a while, go back into my deficit, etc.? So kind of similar to people in that in the position, where they've got a big weight loss goal. Even when we're sitting around that sort of 10-ish kilo mark, usually we're not too tempted by a weight gain phase or a muscle gain phase, because for most people, we want to be at a healthy weight range for the sake of our health, but also for just how we're feeling and our mindset and mentality. Most people don't want to actively pursue weight gain when they actually want to achieve weight loss first. So that's why I would advise really utilizing those first few months of the year, if it suits you and your schedule and your lifestyle to do so, to achieve fat loss first. And side note, guys, I feel like I've said this in nearly every podcast I've ever done. When I say weight loss, we don't have to look at exact numbers and nitpicking the scale and stuff, but this can just be an easy way to sort of categorize people. You know, if you've got a big weight loss goal, you know, if your weight loss goal is around 10 kilos, you know, if you're around a healthy weight range. So it's not so much about scale and the numbers and all that, but it's more so about using that as a bit of a guide to work out where you fall with all of this chat. So coming back to a person in this position, like I keep saying, I would use those first few months of the year to your advantage if it suits you to do so. Have a look around April. How am I feeling? Do I want to have a diet break? Does it make sense to have a diet break? I think, as a bit of a side note, even if there's no actual reason to for events, schedule, holidays, etc., usually around that 3-ish month mark is when people just start to kind of hit a bit of a wall with dieting, give or take, but usually around that 10 to 12 week mark. And we want to be a little bit proactive and be like, okay, fuck, I have actually been knuckling down and getting after it in a deficit for a while. I am starting to feel it a little bit. Intercept that, have the diet break before we actually really hit the wall and shit comes undone. Use the diet break to just relieve some of those things. And then what I was getting at there is then we can assess as we come out the other side, do I have further fat loss and weight loss to go? Do I go back into my deficit for a while? Do I want to chill in maintenance and that diet break mode for a bit longer through winter and possibly look at fat loss again later in the year? There's absolutely no right or wrong with this stuff. It's purely going to come down to the individual looking at A, what is the goal? What is the thing I want to achieve? And B, when does it suit me and my lifestyle to actually implement what's required to achieve that? And that ties in with what I was just saying. We always want to be proactive. And this is why I'm such a fan of nutrition education, because I think we really want to know this stuff. We want to understand this stuff and be aware and accepting of it. I think it's so common for people to not understand nutrition and not really be aware and accepting of these things and just be on that constant grind of I need to eat good, I need to eat well, I need to lose weight. And if there's so much else to consider. If you think about this, I haven't shut the fuck up for the last 2 weeks, but also the last 2 years, because there's so much shit to consider here. If we're just in this grind, ignore every other factor, we tend to just spin our wheels and not get anywhere because we're not actually educated and working with stuff. We're just kind of constantly running into that wall because we don't have effective, smart dieting in place. So we always want to be educated and aware and then proactive and go, okay, I know what's required to achieve my goal. I'm looking at the rest of my lifestyle. What's happening? How can I make all this work? Does it make sense to implement what is required to achieve the goal? Yes, it does. Awesome. Let's do it. No, it doesn't. So I will chill at maintenance for a while. I will have a diet break. I will manage my expectations. I feel like we've kind of had this convo so much over the last 3 weeks, but it's just really important. I think this is the number one message I always want to get across to people, is just to be really, really educated on this stuff and really understanding and accepting of it and work with it, not against it. So coming back to these people, can we see why I had to split this into 2 episodes? Coming back to a person with that 10-ish weight loss goal, I would be dieting through those first few months of the year if it suits you. Get to April, diet break around that time, whenever it suits you, and then assess where you go from there. Obviously, if you're someone that has like the muscle gain and the toning and the performance goals, like you're a gym girl that wants to have a bit of a phase like that, it can really be a good time of year to do so, like through the winter. If we're looking at like Australian schedule, I know sometimes we have international listeners, which is cool, but if we're looking like Australian schedule, most people want to sort of tighten things up and have that little bit of a deficit after the new year if you need to, or after New Year's, I should say, in the new year, if you need to. And then if we do want to have a bit of a higher calorie, muscle gain, etc. sort of phase, the winter can be a good time to do so. So I'm going to speak about that a little bit more later on, but that is what I would be implementing for those first few months of the year if you're in this position, and then really just doing like a reassessment around April. And I think my actual original point there, I was trying to work out and remember where I was going. I think my original point with this was we want to implement the diet break at some point, even if we don't feel like we need to. So it can be common to sort of get to that 10 or 12 week mark. And like I said, for a lot of people, we have hit the wall and we are feeling it. For some people, they're like, no, I'm good. I'll keep going. You just want to be really aware of how you're feeling and how everything's going. Like I said, we don't want to grind too much and then really hit the wall because we didn't intercept with a diet break. So I hope all that made sense, and really just thinking like, if you've done 10 to 12-ish weeks in a solid deficit, being mindful to bring in a 1 to 2 week diet break at some point, instead of trying to grind for too long, hitting a point where you like go into fuck it mode, whatever, this has become too hard and I've just fallen off track. We want to intercept with an intentional diet break before we fall off track, is what I'm saying. And the things that tend to make people fall off track is the accumulation of all the shit I keep talking about with energy, hunger, cravings, mood, grinding through a deficit. So really just being aware that when those things do start to kick in, intercept quite quickly, diet break before they become a bigger problem, is what I'm getting at there. So that is that category. I feel like we've ticked that one off. The next little category I want to speak to, I feel like we've kind of got 2, maybe 3 more. We'll see where she goes. But I think it's common for people to be in that position where they're like, probably don't need to lose 10 kilos, but I would love to tighten things up a little bit, tone up a little bit, trim up a little bit, lose 1 to 2 kilos, maybe 3 or 4, whatever it is. I feel like there's a lot we could say here, but I'll see if I can condense it. I think one of the first things to really think about is, do you actually need to do this? And that's quite a cock block on my business because we are launching and selling a program called the Fat Loss Phase right now. And I'm telling people to consider whether they really need to pursue fat loss. So just know that this comes from a very good intention place. I just think it is so common I think one of the most common things is just being a female who has always been in that mindset of, I should lose a little bit of weight. Really, if we think about, we've spoken about this so much on the podcast, but just that constant conditioning, if we think about every fucking magazine cover that we saw for 20 years had lose 5 kilos on the front. If that has not conditioned all of us to just feel like, I should probably lose 5 kilos, I don't know what has. Like it makes so much sense if you're someone who just always feels like, I should just lose a couple of kilos. And I just think it's so important to really be aware of that and think, do I actually fucking need to? Or have I just been feeling like I, quote, should for a really long time? Just strip it all back, and it can be easier said than done, but at some point we've got to do it and just really tap in and go, do I actually fucking need to lose weight, or do I just think I do because I've seen weight loss shit everywhere for the last 20, 30, 40 years, however old you are. Sometimes when we say this and we pose this question, people are then like, yep, cool, I get that. There is a lot of shit out there. There is a lot of conditioning, but I do actually feel like I want to lose a little bit of weight. And it's more that like, this is where we're looking more at like fat loss and just like tightening things up and toning up, as opposed to like dropping crazy numbers, like I said before. So often we can be in this position where we're like, yeah, I actually do want to tighten things up a little bit. If you're in this position where it's quite a small like weight loss numbers goal, it is more that like fat loss, refining the physique goal. Usually, not always, but usually we need to have a somewhat low calorie intake in place, and not too low. But what I'm getting at is usually if we do not need to lose a big amount of weight, if we think about calculating nutrition targets, a big element and a big factor in that calculation is the body weight of a person. If we're in a position where body weight is already low and we're looking at just refining it, by default then the intake that's needed to refine it is often quite low because we're working with a smaller body. So if we have a person that's 120 kilos calculating their nutrition target versus a person who's 60 kilos, if every other factor was the same in terms of like height, activity levels, etc., the smaller body is going to require less energy, if we really think about that. So what I'm getting at here is, and if you can relate to this, you're definitely not alone. This is why I'm talking about it. If you feel like you're quite small, quite petite, quite light, whatever it is, and then when you calculate your deficit, you're just like, fuck, that's somewhat low and a little bit challenging to stick to, that is usually just part of it because we're working with a small body and we're refining things. So it really is that like tightening up. The reason I'm crapping on about this is because what I think we need to really think about here and what I advise here is if we are going to do this, and I'm a perfect example of this, guys. Anytime I go into a fat loss phase, usually I'm around that like mid 60 mark, like 60 kilos. My deficit, my effective deficit is around 15 or 1600. And to some people, that feels really low. To some people, it doesn't. Like what is quote low is subjective. It's going to be different from person to person. But usually when I see people that are a similar size to me wanting to just achieve that little bit of fat loss and drop things that little bit more, usually we see an intake around like 14, 15, 1600, right? If we think about pursuing fat loss on that intake as opposed to someone that might be able to achieve fat loss on 2000, naturally 14 or 1500 is going to be a bit more difficult. You've literally got 500 calories less every day to work with. So again, what I'm getting at is we don't want to do that for too long. We don't want to do it for too long because you're already a small person. It doesn't make sense for you to spend 6 months in a deficit. That actually just doesn't make sense. But we also don't want to do it for too long because that can be quite hard. It can be quite challenging. It can just be like shitty and annoying. You're just like, I've got fuck all calories to work with. It's just shit, right? And then if we think about planning lowish cal days, it can be hard to fit in protein, fiber, fruit, veg, all that. Usually we can't fit in too many fun foods. So again, we can just feel like, fuck, this is a bit shit. So what I'm getting at is, if you're in this position, in my opinion, I think you want to pick a window where you really knuckle down, get in and get it done. You don't have to, there's no right or wrong, do what you want. But I think it's so common for people in this position to not want to admit or accept that they do need to have that lowish intake in place to really get the result that they want. So they kind of fuck around on a little bit of a moderately higher intake. Let's just use myself for an example. If I know I get really effective physique refinement and that little bit of fat loss on 15 or 1600 cals and my maintenance is a bit over 2000, if I was to be like, oh, I don't want to do 1500, I'm just going to hang around on like 1800, right? Again, there's nothing wrong with this, but what tends to happen there is it's still a bit low. It's still a little bit restrictive. Like I don't want to hang there forever, but I'm also not really getting the benefit because my benefit happens more so around 15 or 1600. So you're kind of just hanging in this in-between phase. And I think a lot of people can probably relate to this. And sometimes we even see this happen where it's like we know the intake should be a bit lower, but then we're a little bit snacky, we're a bit loose and we're a bit flexible. So the actual intake coming in does end up being that little bit higher. And then again, we're kind of spinning our wheels. We're not really reaping the benefits. And again, it's kind of just hanging in that in-between phase. I'm not on a wicked, enjoyable intake that I can really just plan wicked days with and get after it. But I'm also not on that low intake that I need to be on to really get fat loss happening. So I'm not really getting fat loss happening. And again, I'm kind of just floating in the middle. If you can relate to this, and especially if you've done this on and off in the past, really have a think about it and go, do I just have to acknowledge and accept that to really achieve the result I want is maybe a bit of a lower intake than I wish it was? And again, in a perfect world, we could eat more and we could click our fingers and we could just get there and all those things. But this is where we want to fuck off the wishing and the hoping and all that and just go, what do I actually know to be the intake and the effective intake I need to achieve the thing I want? Even if I don't like it, if I know that that is it, if I do really want to pursue that thing, again, first of all, consider if you actually have to. Could you actually just live your life with an extra 3 kilos on you and feel a lot better and live a way better life and eat more food and have a great time? Right? First thing to consider. But if you're like, nope, I really want to fucking get in there and get it done and tighten things up a bit. If we know the intake has to be that bit lower to do it, I think we need to find that small window where we really get in there, we hit that intake, we get it done, and then we get out. Because again, think about a person that kind of floats on that in-between intake is like, I don't want to diet too low, but I don't want to go to maintenance. You really are hanging in the middle and you tend to hang there for months and not really see anything happen. You're not eating low enough to have that real effective deficit in place and see fat loss. You're not eating high enough for it to be really enjoyable and hit performance goals and big lifts and muscle growth and anything like that. And then the weeks just tend to roll by and you're kind of like, I'm just sort of floating midair, not really getting anywhere. Again, I think the alternative and the better solution is picking that window. I don't want to put numbers on it, but I would say anywhere from like 6 to 10-ish weeks, give or take, be different for everyone, but get in there, hit that intake, get the result you want, and then get out and go to maintenance and actually increase the intake, have enjoyable days, hit the performance goals, hit the lifts, hit all those things. I think we need to separate these two a little bit more. I think so many people, bit of a side note, but it's worth mentioning. I think so many people need to eat that little bit lower to achieve fat loss. And this is not advice or like telling people to eat lower, by the way, but if you can relate to everything I'm saying, it's just important to kind of clock and think about for yourself. So I'm definitely not telling everyone to go out there and eat less. I'm just saying, think about if you can relate to some of this stuff. Do you need to just sort of revisit some of your protocols? But I think it's so common for people to need to eat that little bit lower but not really do it. But then on the flip side, they could actually eat a lot more when they're at maintenance, but they don't really do that either. And then they kind of live on this in-between intake. But like I keep saying, that intake doesn't really result in anything for them because it is such an in-betweener. So I feel like I've harped on about that enough, but if you're in this position where you're sort of thinking, it's usually that sort of, I'd love to tone up a little bit, drop a little bit of body fat, tone up a little bit. I would be looking like, do I need quite a short, sharp, effective deficit at some point to just really snap up that last little bit of fat loss that I want? And then once I've got that, get out of that deficit, get to maintenance. If we think about, we've spoke about this before, but the other element to a toned physique is enough muscle mass. If we actually achieve the fat loss, there's enough muscle mass underneath to reveal a nice toned physique. So if we really think about a person who has a goal of being toned, you want to have that short, sharp window where we drop that body fat. But then we also want to have phases where we work on the muscle mass, which again is the thing that's going to help us do that is the higher intake, which again brings me back to the point where that mid-range intake isn't really getting fat loss or muscle gain happening. So there's nothing happening there. So if you've got the goal to be toned or tone up, consider whether you do have a little short fat loss phase at some point. Maybe you do it straight away in the new year, or maybe you focus on the muscle gain and that element first, and then you visit the fat loss at some point. And really what I would be thinking about there is it's so common for people who do have the goal of wanting to tone up to always be focused on the fat loss. And that's such an important thing to catch because like I keep saying, there's two elements to it. If you can relate to this and you do have that goal of wanting to tone up, but then you think, fuck, I've just been chipping away at fat loss for so long, even though I've got fuck all fat to lose, really? Again, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I would be considering, do I need to go into a fat loss phase in the new year, or do I need to spend some real sufficient time eating a bit more, focusing on training, actually building a bit of a physique and a rig and some muscle underneath, and then schedule my little sharp fat loss phase maybe for like coming out of winter or something and get that done. And when I do get that done and strip back that bit of body fat, there's some wicked muscle mass and tone and all of that underneath. And I think that's so underrated. I think spending, let's say 6 months, let's say you go into January, I'd say 6 or 7. Let's say you go into Jan and you go, I'm going to eat at my maintenance intake and I'm just going to focus on really fucking killing it with a solid, structured, progressive resistance training program. You spend 7 months eating at maintenance, lifting really well, getting enough protein. You're going to build that little bit of shape, that bit of muscle mass, not in a big bodybuilder way, but just in a nice little like physique rig way. You then have that intentional little fat loss phase through maybe like July or August to September, where, like I said, you hit that low intake that you need to hit, you get in, you get it done. You find yourself this time next year where you're like, fuck, I spent 7 or 8 months really building some shape, and then I spent 7 or 8 weeks really revealing that shape, and now I'm sitting here in a way better position with this toned physique that I've always wanted. So I think there's a few ways you can navigate that. You could do a little bit of fat loss first in the new year if you felt like you wanted to or you needed to. You could fuck off the idea of fat loss for a while and just focus on building the shape and then go into that little fat loss phase later on at some point. And I feel like this category almost kind of segues into the last category I want to speak about, and that is the people that do not need to achieve fat loss. And I think it's so common, again, if you think about the conditioning and the history and the fucking magazine covers and all the shit we've spoken about, some people just assume that everybody wants to achieve fat loss. But I think it's so important to remember that that's not the case. And I think if you are in a position where you're in a healthy weight range and maybe you've had successful fat loss, maybe you've never really needed to, whatever it is, really just stop for a second and go, do I actually need to pursue fat loss, pursue weight loss, implement a deficit, any of these things? Or would I really benefit from a year of, like I just said, that wicked maintenance intake coming in, structured progressive resistance training program, building the parts of your body that you want to build and create shape with, get enough protein to facilitate that muscle build, facilitate recovery, all the things. Protein, absolute game changer. If you don't eat enough protein, start doing so right now. But somebody who spends, like I said, 12-ish months focusing on that, if you're in a healthy weight range right now and you dedicate 12 months to just building some shape and really getting after it in that sense, you can see such wicked, subtle but awesome changes in your physique. And that's going to be a little bit different from person to person. Some people respond really well to weight training. Some people it takes a little bit longer. That's just genetics and that is what it is. But 12 months of really dedicating your energy and your time and everything to creating shape instead of just weighing less can be so beneficial. So I think that sort of ties in with that last category, and I think people just need to decide for themselves where they fall with that. But don't just always assume that there needs to be more fat loss or more weight loss, because it doesn't always need to be. And sometimes we can really actually find the physique that we want and see the benefits we want to see when we move away from that mentality and instead focus on eating a decent amount and training in a decent way. And that kind of even segues into the last category I want to speak about, which is people with a performance goal. And when I say performance goal, I mean more so like the marathons, half marathons, triathlon, high rocks, all of those things. We've spoken about this a little bit throughout 2024. I think these things are huge right now and I think they're awesome. But what I would really advise, especially as we're sitting here now, like coming into the last few weeks of the year, If you're someone who's looking at 2025 and wanting to schedule in one or some of these things, I think we really need to be a bit more smart and a bit more intentional with our planning. If you're going into an event like this or you want to do an event like this, I think you owe it to your body to be organized to look after it. And what I mean by that is, I've said before, I've said on Insta, I've said on the pod, we don't want to ask our body to do an event it's never done while we're giving it fuck all energy. So if you're pursuing something like a half marathon or high rocks or something like that you've never done before, or maybe you have done it, but you're training to be better and do it in a better way, again, you're still training for something you've never done before because you want to do it on a level you've never done it before. If you're training for something like that and you're asking your body to do something like that, we've got to consider the fact that weight loss and fat loss is achieved through an energy deficit, giving the body less energy than it needs every day. And then you're over here asking your body to do something it's never done before, which really we want to make sure it's got enough energy to do. So we have a big disconnect here where it's like, I want to achieve this performance thing or this event that I really should give my body enough energy to train for and to compete in. But if you do have a fat loss goal or a weight loss goal at the same time, that requires an energy deficit. And these things have a big disconnect and a big mismatch. So this is coming back to that point I just said, where if you do want to do one of these things, I think you owe it to your body to be more organized, to make sure that you time it all a little bit better. First of all, if you're going to do one of these events or performance things and you don't have a fat loss goal or a weight loss goal, that's awesome. I would be getting on your maintenance intake, decent intake in place, enjoyable intake, get enough protein, get enough carbs, and really just prioritize training and fueling that training. That's awesome. Big yes from me. If you do want to do one of these things, but you also want to achieve some fat loss at some point, this is where you've got to be a bit more organized and look at what times of the year am I going to restrict my energy to work towards the fat loss goal. Knowing that I have restricted energy coming in, I'm not going to do that really close to an event or during big volume training weeks or anything like that. And then looking at the events and those big volume training weeks and going, okay, if I know I've got these weeks and these times coming up, making sure that I don't have my fat loss protocols in place at that same time because I need energy for these things and I need insufficient energy for fat loss. So really, this is where we want to look and be organized and go, okay, if I'm doing something, maybe I'm doing an event in July or August, do I do fat loss for maybe 3 months of the year? And then when I get to April or May, I shift my intake, like I increase my intake to maintenance and I'm fueling myself a little bit more. And I'm working towards fueling that event and increasing my training volume for that event. Or if you go into the year on that maintenance intake and you prioritize fueling that event and then you do fat loss after the event or something like that. Like there's so many ways you can navigate it, but I think the number one thing for these people is being organized, making sure that there isn't a clash. And anytime you're asking your body to do something big or extreme or awesome, you're giving it a big, extreme, awesome amount of fuel to do so. Make sure there is not a disconnect with big, awesome training volume, fuck all energy to carry out that training volume. That's a big mismatch. So I think in those last few categories, there could be a bit of crossover. Like we might have people that are like, oh, I have a little bit of a fat loss goal and I also want to do an event and I want to get some muscle gain at some point. And I think that's usually where nutrition and training is quite a priority to you, and this stuff is very much like your focus and your lifestyle, which is awesome. I love it. But that's where we then want to be a bit more organized and a bit more proactive and go, okay, if I want to tick off multiple things, at what point do I work towards what things, instead of, I feel like I literally said this on the first ever podcast and I've probably said it 100 times since, but we don't want to find ourselves in a position where we're like, right now I'm working towards fat loss and doing a marathon and I want to grow my glutes. It just doesn't make sense. These are 3 different goals that are going to require 3 different intakes and training styles and training volumes. So we want to pick phases and windows where we focus on one and the others get scaled back a little bit and then vice versa. So to wrap up these last 2 episodes, I feel like they've been info overload, but I really wanted to get them out there as we head into the last few weeks of the year. So you can think about implementing a bit of a break and just loosening the reins, having a bit of flexibility, having a bit of chill time through December. Literally just give yourself a physical break and also give your mind and your energy and your stress and all those things a bit of a break as well. If you've been grinding through nutrition and training all year or for multiple years, just give yourself a bit of a fucking break. You've got my permission, and give yourself permission. Just scale shit back a little bit. Enjoy the festive season. Take a deep breath, have a bit of a breather, get some relief, and get pumped and excited to go again in the new year. Side note, if you haven't listened to last week's pod or the Fuck It Mode pod, definitely do so because they'll really tie into that. But that's the first thing I would think about. I would then consider, if you're a person who knows that fat loss or weight loss is the big main focus for you, definitely listen to last week's episode and really just make sure that you know how to achieve fat loss for yourself, so you know that you can go into the year with the actual plan and protocols that are going to work for you to do so. And then think about everything we spoke about with diet breaks and maintenance, etc., and really looking at the year as a whole, not looking at one day like day-to-day results or quick fix energy or anything like that. Really think about where you would love to be in 12 months' time and schedule the year accordingly to do that. If you know that you don't have that big weight loss goal or that's not your big focus for the year, that's awesome. I would then be looking at, do I have a small fat loss goal? And if I do, when does it suit me to implement that? Do I instead have muscle gain or performance goals? What do I need to have in place to do that? And if I have those actual performance and events goals, how do I line up my year to really look after myself and my health and my energy and my body and all of that as I ask it to perform and complete those things? I think this is a perfect place to wrap up. I hope you guys got something out of these episodes. I feel like surely we did. And like I said at the start, guys, please rate the Eat Like Ruby podcast on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to it. It means so much to me. Obviously, chuck us a follow on Instagram, eat_like_Ruby. We are absolutely going to keep pumping out podcasts and content and all of the things as we head into the festive season and 2025. But I love and appreciate the support so much. So please keep it coming, and I will keep everything coming for you guys. And like I said last week, if you do have a fat loss goal heading into the new year, the Eat Like Ruby Fat Loss Phase is open right now to join. If you join before January 1st, everything opens up on January 1st and you can just get stuck into it straight away. And then our official start day is, I think it's Monday the 27th of January, whatever that Monday is. That's our official day one. So if you do join before that day, you essentially just get a bit of a head start. And then our 10-week starts from the 27th. It rolls right through like Feb, March into early April. And I think that's such a perfect window for anyone who does want to prioritize fat loss straight off the bat in the new year. That is open to join right now. But apart from that, thank you guys so much for listening. I will be back next week.